How else would I do it? No, what you're doing is it's like a dog chasing his own tail, basically. Pardon me for the analogy. So what you're doing basically is you're using a method that we use as human beings, which has assumptions. One assumption being that we're rational. So you're using the method that assumes we're rational, and then you're using it to try and validate rationality. That's circular. You can't do that.
Oh my God!
Of course it is.
Well, I'm basing it on the laws of logic,
all these cameras,
which are self-attesting.
Look at the camera.
Would you agree or not?
Foundational, axiomatic, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, correct. Do you agree with that?
Yes. But that's what I'm asking you. That your rational faculties, how do you, on your worldview, which is atheism by extension naturalism, right?
Yes.
Mine is Islam and theism by extension.
Yes.
How do you, in your worldview, account for rationality in the first place, right? Before we delve into a method which requires an axiom, which is rationality, right? On your worldview, on atheism, on naturalism, which is the idea everything is a result of natural causes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Everything that in existence is physical. It's a result of physical processes. There is no mind or intelligence or awareness behind all of this.
I'm not absolutely saying that. There could be, but I just don't see any justification for that.
No, but I want to know what your position is, because I don't want to be talking to it in general. It doesn't make sense us having
So
a
in
discussion.
general, my position is naturalism.
Okay, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong again, which is everything is a result of physical processes. There is no mind, there is no awareness, there is no
You mean
intelligence.
external mind to our own?
Well, okay, let me put it this way. Let me try using my words correctly. There is nothing except physical processes which over millions of years or billions of years have resulted in everything we see around us in the physical world. That's
Okay, fair enough.
Is that fair?
Yeah,
that's
fine.
And according to this foundation, this worldview, and what it assumes, that being the case what I've just discussed, then how do you account for ordered rational faculties which lead to truth? Something doesn't add up there for me, because what you're saying essentially is you have blind random physical processes taking place without any intention or intentionality or thinking or life behind them, and somehow they resulted in rational ordered thought, which makes sense of the world around us.
Yeah.
How do you make that jump? That's what I'm interested in.
When you say how to make the jump, and I said to you the evolutionary process,
Yes.
from lower thinking to better thinking.
What was your name, by the way?
Rob.
Yours? Imran. Sorry.
Imran, right.
We'll discuss the evolutionary explanation. I don't mind entertaining it.
Okay, but you keep asking me the foundation.
You don't understand the crucial point I'm making. I'll engage you on that level, because I've studied that on an academic level, the evolutionary explanation for human rationality and consciousness. We'll discuss that. But there's a more fundamental point, and that's this. That before we give a scientific explanation, it makes no sense in giving one, because the foundations and axioms of science, one being that we need to accept that we're rational and we have truth-bearing rational faculties. So if that's an assumption of science and you need that to do science, in what sense is it in a circular way, then using science to justify and validate that? The discussion firstly is at a more foundational level, which is worldviews. What best accounts for these truth-bearing rational faculties? Atheism or naturalism or Islam? That's the main question here. We'll discuss the science.
So you give me yours, because then I can understand better where you're coming from. So
I'll give
explain yours.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll give the Islamic one's very simple. And the beautiful thing about the Islamic explanation is we can give you the how and the why.
Go ahead.
Because according to the Islamic perspective, God is the creator, He's all powerful, and He created our rational minds. It's easy for Him. For example, in the Quran, He says, be and it is. Kun fayakun.
Yes.
Right? Be and it is. It's that simple. God creates. So He created our rational minds. Number two, the why. Well, God gave us rational minds so we can use our rational faculties to observe the physical reality around us, which is a sign which points back towards Him. So when we observe the physical world and we see the amazing nature of the world around us, from something as simple as a DNA molecule to something as complex as the laws that govern this universe, these are all signs that point back towards the Creator. And in turn we worship Him, we turn back to Him, and we say, we understand that that's God and this is us, right? That's the Islamic understanding, the how and the why. It's a very comprehensive answer. But on the other hand, on naturalism, you don't have an answer. You have, if anything...
And even if I didn't, let's say, so what? Does that mean that you can then insert yours to say that's the only option?
Okay, what you said is very interesting. Even if I didn't, so what? Well, there's
When I say it didn't, we don't yet know. Let's assume that we don't yet know the answer.
Listen, let's not have a discussion based on the loose assumptions. I'm discussing you as your position, right? So what is your position right now? Do you, from your worldview, understand this reality, or don't you? That's the question.
As far as I can understand, I understand this reality.
Because right now you said, even if my worldview, naturalism, can't account for human rationality or truth-bearing faculties, so what? Well, there's huge implications. One being, you having a discussion with me right now is pointless, because you can't account for you don't know, right? From your point of view, you don't know, right? On the other hand, it makes my case, because what I'm trying to do here is give you da'wah, which is an invitation to the Islamic worldview, is to ask you to come and observe this reality, because it has a very comprehensive way of understanding reality, including rationality. So so there are some implications there, right?
Yes.
So now, if you want to carry on this discussion, now I'm not saying you're not rational. On my worldview, I can account for your rationality for you even, right? But I don't want to do that.
Good.
I want to know your worldview, how according to naturalism or atheism you account for human rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties, before we indulge in the scientific explanations, which we'll discuss anyway. I'll grant you that in a bit. But for now,
why is the evolutionary process unsatisfactory to you?
No, it's not. Well, it is to me, but I'll explain that to you. Like I said, we will discuss that. But firstly, you have to discuss it from a foundational level, which is on your worldview, which is naturalism, atheism. How do you account for these rational faculties? How do you account for this very thing, which is an axiom of the scientific method itself?
Which I've said to you, I account for that through evolution, and you are saying that's not good enough.
I don't think
my worldview. No, maybe you're not, or maybe you're not accepting that as my explanation.
Well, you agreed to it, so I thought you understood it, but you obviously haven't. What I'm saying is very simple. We could discuss the scientific explanation, but science is a method as human beings use, right? We agree. Science is a method we use as human beings, and that method has some axioms, some assumptions.
Yes.
Before you do it.
They're called properly based.
Yes. One of the assumptions is, I wouldn't go into that terminology, but we can discuss it later. One of the assumptions is that we are rational, we have truth-bearing rational faculties.
You've said
if you don't accept this assumption, you can't do science. It doesn't make you stupid.
I agree.
Okay?
I accept that assumption.
So,
yes.
then what I'm saying is this. Then it makes no sense for you to give me a scientific explanation to account for its own assumption. That's like a dog chasing his own tail. You're accepting something to do science, but then when you start doing science, you're saying, hold on a minute, I'm not accepting the very thing I accepted to do science, but now I'm going to use an explanation within science to explain that reality. It
seems like it from your point of view. I don't see it that way.
Well, it is. That's what you're doing, essentially.
I don't see it that way.
Why not?
I assume my existence and I assume the laws of logic at a basic level.
No, we're talking about human rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties.
Which are based on what?
Do you accept that we're rational as human beings? Yes. Do you accept that we have the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood as human beings? Yes. We eventually get to that if we use our faculties.
Scientific method,
yeah. Well, that's one method, but there's a process we use to get to that. Now, that's what I'm talking about. The laws of logic, there may be an aspect of it, but then there's the whole thing one. But I'm speaking about a whole comprehensive reality.
I'm saying to the laws of logic are foundational.
But now you're changing this discussion. We're discussing rational faculties. Our faculties which lead us to truth. Which
I'm saying to you that came about through the evolutionary process.
Okay, but for the sixth time, I understand that. That's an explanation a scientist would give.
That's my answer to your foundation of how do I account for the rationality.
No. Okay, let me try explaining it again. It's very simple. I'm sure most of us understand it. What I'm saying is this. As human beings, one of the things, assumptions or axioms of science is that we are rational and we have truth-bearing faculties. Yes or no? Yes, we've agreed to this. Now, what I'm saying is this. You're assuming this before you engage in science. Yes, okay. Now, giving a scientific explanation, therefore, for this reality, it doesn't make sense because you're assuming you're already to be true before you give me a scientific explanation, right? So that's what I'm saying, the discussion's on a more foundational level. Let's look at it from worldviews first, and then we'll discuss the scientific explanations, right? That's what I'm saying. It's very simple. So, and you seem to admit, you said vaguely that even if I can't account for it, so what? But there's huge implications to even our discussion right now. It makes no sense you are standing here having a discussion.
Trying to smuggle in the presuppositional thing.
No.
I don't accept your premise.
One second. That's completely false. It will be a presuppositional argument if I was saying you cannot claim rationality unless you justify it. I'm not saying that. I'm starting off with the premise that it is foundational. We accept it, both of us do. But I'm saying what worldview accounts for it. There's a difference. So let's not straw man my position. That's what you're trying to do now. You're trying to straw man my position, allegate me as a presuppositionalist. I'm not.
Well, I have seen you use the presuppositional argument.
Fair enough. But I'm using a more refined version with you right now,
I can see
which is a bit more.
But you are sneaking it in at the base level. That's my opinion.
Let me disprove that opinion, because if you study presuppositionalism, one of the premises of that is you begin with the premise that the individual you're discussing with can't account for his rationality unless he adopts normally a Christian worldview, because that's the arguments they develop.
Correct, yes.
Well, my premise is that we are rational. We have rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties. What best accounts for them? This is a totally different argument. It's not a presuppositional argument.
So the naturalistic explanation.
So what is from your worldview, how does your worldview, which is naturalism, account for human rationality, truth-bearing faculties.
So the development of our brain.
No. These faculties that you have, the development we can discuss a scientific explanation for it.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. You're going to keep insisting. I'm going to keep saying to you, the foundation is evolution through the development of our brain. At one point, we had common ancestor. We couldn't speak. We couldn't rationalize. In that process, we got to where we are now.
Let me make it easy.
In that process, we've learned.
Let me make it easy. What you're saying to me right now, is that scientific explanation?
Say again?
Is that scientific explanation what you're telling me right now?
Yes.
Okay. Science is a method which we human beings use.
Yes.
That method, here's the method, it has some assumptions.
Yes.
Before you accept these assumptions, you can't use this method.
Yes.
Right? One of the assumptions that we've agreed that you use is that we are rational beings that have truth-bearing faculties.
Yes.
Now, you assume this to be true before you use the scientific method. Then why are you trying to use a scientific explanation to justify the assumption of science? You don't understand. It's a very simple point I'm making. Because, right?
Your argument sort of.
Let me just finish it.
Therefore, God exists.
I'll talk to you in a second, but let's because it gets messy otherwise.
No,
so do you see the point I'm making?
I assume certain things in this world in order for us to exist.
Okay,
there
now
are basic assumptions which I've given you.
Yeah, and human
from that
rationality
we can build.
Okay, my question is simple. Your worldview, what explanation, or how do you account for this assumption that you have, which is human rationality?
You can keep asking the question in 15 different ways. I'm going to keep giving you the same answer.
Because the reality is you don't have an answer.
I've given you my answer.
You admitted it earlier, you don't have an answer. You said, so what if I don't have an answer?
I said, let's suppose that we didn't. But I'm not saying
Well,
that.
if we've support, no, but that's what you're not giving me an answer after understanding what I'm saying. Well, it shows me that you don't have an answer. That's what it shows me.
Okay, if you want to assume that, it's fine.
Well, I'm
I've
assuming
asked you
that-
about 3 times.
I'm assuming
Have
that.
you not heard it?
No, you haven't.
Have you been standing here the whole time?
I've heard. It's been recorded in your camera. I'm sure your users will see this. It's been recorded here. I've told you 10 times probably why what you're doing is almost like a dog chasing his own tail, right? Because you're using an assumption of science which you accept to be true to do science,
Yes.
and then you're using a scientific explanation to justify that very assumption. It's circular. It's ridiculously circular.
If you think so.
But so, that being the case, on your worldview,
Correct.
on your worldview, atheism and naturalism, how do you account for human rationality? And I'll keep asking you that question because
I'll keep responding the
Well, you
same. From a naturalistic point of view, and the moment I speak to you, you are claiming I'm using science.
Well, no, you yourself.
I open my mouth, I'm using science in your
You
view.
yourself have told me that what you're saying.
You're
is
asking for an explanation.
Well, obviously, you don't have an explanation.
And I'm giving you one, and you are claiming that it's a scientific explanation.
Yes, and you admit that.
Yes.
That's exactly. So what's the if you admit what I'm saying is the case, then why you?
So I'm using a scientific, and you are presupposing that God exists and did it for you.
Let's move on to the scientific
Yes.
point now, because we're not getting anywhere. You obviously don't have an explanation from
I told you
from
mine.
a worldview.
It's not
perspective.
acceptable to you. You've given me yours, which you presupposed.
Everyone can see the point I was making. You obviously didn't understand that point. But that being the case, obviously now, I'm going to assume this because you haven't given me an answer. According to your worldview, you don't have an answer to human rationality, truth-bearing faculties. Anyway, let's address your scientific contention. So you're saying that we develop rational faculties according to what science tells us today, so we can reason better and survive. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Well, that understanding is not held even by atheist scientists that study human cognition and rationality. There's several problems. You can study Thomas Nagel, who's an open atheist. He's written a book called Mind and Cosmos. There's another interesting book written by...
All right, so let me ask you
I'm
the
going to give you the
question.
answer. I'm going to tell you why what you've assumed is incorrect, according to scientists, atheist scientists as well. There's another book published by Oxford Press called Beyond Evolution, right? Anthony O'Hare's Oxford Press published publication. And what he basically says, in not too many words, is that human rationality, truth-bearing faculties are not necessary for survival. Many examples you can give, which this shows that this is the case, and if this is the case, then there's no need to, or there's no reason for truth-bearing faculties to develop. I'll give you a simple analogy, just to put things in perspective.
I don't necessarily agree.
Anthony O'Hare gives the analogy. You can tell me why you disagree. You may find an individual who avoids eating all mushrooms, the food itself, right? Or fungi, whatever the correct word is you use. He avoids all mushrooms and he survives, and he's fine, right? But we know that's a false belief, it's a false understanding, because there's some mushrooms which are completely edible, and if you eat those mushrooms, you will survive, right? So it's a simple example of where a false or misunderstanding of a belief, or a false belief, results in survival, right? Also, interestingly, it's a very detailed point, but the book Beyond Evolution makes a very interesting point. He says, evolution is concerned with the most simple process you can implement as a faculty which would lead to a certain outcome, which is survival, right? Now, when it comes to survival, understanding the world around us or a situation, take a predator in a survival situation or an animal in a survival situation. Now, for him to calculate his environment, his surroundings and the situation and the nature and truth of the situation will take too long. It's a very complicated process. Instead, what's a more of an easier, viable option is for a organism to basically be given a cue or a signal or some sort of color. Maybe that may be seeing a color, it may be seeing some sort of flash or some sort of signaling which will allow him to react and to run away or survive. So that clearly demonstrates that truth-bearing faculties are not necessary from a survival perspective. False beliefs are completely adequate in resulting in survival. According to the science.
Sometimes, not all the time, isn't it?
Of course, but this is the point. If sometimes false beliefs can result in survival and sometimes true beliefs can, then there's no need for a faculty which is truth-bearing, which is purely concerned with truth, to develop from an evolutionary perspective. Because that's not concerned with truth, it's concerned with survival. It's two different things.
Yeah, but over time, what we call evolution, so then let's say the last 1,000 years, not the last million, let's say, we've come to understand truth, correct?
No.
Or a method to ascertain truth.
No. Having a method is one thing, knowing that we have the ability to do so is another thing. That's why I was asking you from a foundational perspective earlier. You can't conflate these points with what we're talking about right now, right? Because now we're going to talk about very wishy-washy type of assumptions which scientists can make, or based on what they've studied we can make, right? This is not the truth. From what we see, false and true beliefs can both result in adequate survival. If this is the case, there's no need for truth-bearing faculties to develop. There's no explanation for them from an evolutionary perspective.
I don't necessarily agree. I need to do more research, but just off the top of my head, that doesn't
have a read of the book by Anthony O'Hare. Anthony O'Hare, Beyond Evolution, published by Oxford Press. Very interesting read. Also by Thomas Nagel, Mind and Cosmos. And he covered in this. Thomas Nagel himself is an atheist, so he's not a theist or a believer.
So what is their view on it then?
Well, like I've just suggested.
Do they suggest that it came from a religious point of view?
Well, no. Thomas Nagel, for example, he argues that a purely naturalistic evolutionary account for human rationality and consciousness is not good enough. He says as atheist scientists, we have to come up with something better. Otherwise, we're going to run into huge problems as we're seeing today. We're running into huge problems from a naturalistic perspective. But from a theistic Islamic perspective, like I gave you, the answers in a nutshell within 2 sentences, I can give you the answers. So purely based on this, Roger, you said, right? Rob, purely based on this, I will encourage you and ask you to look into the Islamic tradition.
I've looked into it, and I'm still looking into it.
Yeah.
And I don't find it convincing in any way so far.
Well, I'll give you one aspect you can look into as well, because many detailed analogies and examples specifically relating to human rationality and cognition as given in the Quran. It would be very interesting for you to study.
Yes, so you're presupposing that the only way that we can have this is through a divine creator.
No, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that it best accounts for it. The Islamic explanation best accounts. It gives you the how and the why.